What's going on, everybody? MC Ryan's got us dialed in. Our sound should be pretty darn precise here, which is fitting on account of the fact that we are talking to two men across the table from us right now that are involved in arguably one of the most precision shooting sports out there. We're going to be talking about some F-class shooting. Now, we have Ian Klemm. He's been on the podcast before, which is pretty sweet. And we don't always get to get him out of his deep, dark engineering hole in the building. But when he does, he comes out and he drops some serious knowledge bombs. So you guys know him. Across from me here, and those of you watching on YouTube, you're probably already dying to hear about these amazing-looking firearms on our table. But across from me here, across from the red rifle, is Niles. And Niles is a friend of ours. He's been around Vortex for a while, and though he does not work at Vortex, he's local to us, and he is also an F-class competitor. So I'll try not, as usual, I'll try not to do all the introductions for him here. But Niles, we'll let you maybe give the listeners out there a quick idea of who you are, what you do, any fun facts about yourself.
Okay, My name's Niles Richardson. I'm out of Spring Green, Wisconsin, not too far from here. And I met Ian a couple years ago through mutual friends here at Vortex. And I was shooting some 1,000 and 2,000 yards, or 1,000 and 1,200 yard stuff over at Lodi. And I wanted to do something a little bit more than just shooting and ring and steel at a long way. So I was introduced to Ian. It was about 2 years ago, I think.
Yeah, I'd say so.
And I said, hey, I think I'd like to get into this FTR, which is, I'll let him explain a little bit, but we shoot 308s out in 1,000 yards, and there's some other stuff too. And so I'm just starting. I'm brand new to it, but it's taken me 2 years to get to this point. Okay, so I met with Ian, and I followed Ian around that year to the matches, and when he won his national championship at Lodi, and then I bought his old gun and sort of started changing it a little bit with a stock that fit me and put a different trigger on it. But he helped me set it up, and we've been training pretty much most of last year, and he won the national championship again. So this year is my year to actually get to shoot side by side, I guess, same matches this spring.
So let me get this straight, though. So ring and steel at 1,200 at some point became child's play.
Not enough.
And you needed something a little bit more precise. Got it.
That was my first indication that he might be nerdy enough for me to take him under my wing. And, if you were one of those kids that you took your animal crackers and you segregated them by species and then ate them one at a time, might be an F-class shooter.
Genus.
Exactly.
I actually am just saying any scientific word that I know. But that you kind of allude to a point where this F-class thing, now we've talked about PRS on the podcast, we've talked about 3-gun on the podcast, a lot about hunting, recreational shooting, stuff like that. The sport of shooting, recreationally, and even many of the competitive sports out there, we haven't gotten into every competition shooting sport, but it's not a difficult one to get started in, necessarily. This one, on the other hand, though, you said mate, you're here after about 2 years, Niles. F-class probably isn't for somebody who's kicking the tires of competitive shooting and they I just want to try something, right? I mean, like...
It could be my personality.
Okay.
I'm kind of, when it comes to shooting, I really want to get everything dialed in. I don't like making a kind of a fool of myself, but you can. I mean, I think you can go out and buy a Savage FTR gun.
100%, yeah.
For really cheap and go out there, scope it up, and go crazy.
Okay.
I, on the other hand, I picked his brain every time we'd get together. It got really nerdy about some... If you watch me reload, I have a scientific scale, and we're talking half a kernel, weight charges.
You're splitting kernels?
Yeah, so that it's exactly the same.
Do you get like an explosion when you start splitting kernels?
Do you seriously have a little razor blade and you cut the kernel?
What I do is I look at the kernel of each powder, and you can see the size difference in them.
No.
And so
you've got a little small kernel, big kernel pile.
Right. So I'll just take a small kernel.
The animal cracker thing is true.
It is. Totally is.
So
You need a 12-step program, but you're perfect for F class.
So that's what I do. And then,
Wow.
After talking with Ian the first year, I went out to a class that's taught by a group that actually Ian's involved with in the spring and the fall of every year with Applied Ballistics with some great shooters. So I took my vacation and flew to Utah by myself to sit and talk ballistics for 48 hours straight with some of the best shooters in the world.
You're made for it.
Yeah, so picking his brain and some of the other high-class shooters' brains, I just want to be prepared when I go out there. So when my reloads, he's like, okay, quit playing with your reloads. They're good enough, So now what I do when I shoot is take notes every day when I'm at Lodi, when I shoot for the wind and everything else, because now I've got the gun, which he's won numerous things with. So it's not the gun. It's not the scope, which Ian designed. Give him credit for that. Everything is set up. So now it's just me. And to be that, you got to be consistent from the start to finish. So all my reloads are as consistent as I can get. I use the same lot of powder. I use the same lot of brass, the same lot of primers, same lot of bullets. I point them all the same way. They're all resized the same way. Once they get 4 reloads on them, they're done, and I start over again.
Okay.
So I don't anneal and some of that other stuff, but you take notes as if you clean the brass. How does it shoot compared to unclean brass? You take notes. How does the gun shoot after fouling? How many rounds does it take to foul it? So I'm really nerdy. I mean,
you actually know at what point your firearm is fouled versus unfouled.
Right. You can tell when it starts, the bullets start coming together, and you get it, so you know that gun's ready to shoot. For scores.
I wish I had the Instagram name of the person who asked that question. But shout out to you if you're listening. Somebody asked. They said that they heard that if you get a clean rifle, like a brand new rifle out of the box, that you should foul it prior to, assuming that it's spot on.
Yeah. And Ian can
right?
talk to you about, he's got a brand new gun that you're not even shooting yet in competition, just to get it to where it needs to be competition ready.
If we can take just a step back for a second, though, because I think there might be some folks listening out there that are asking themselves, what the F is F class?
Yeah, exactly.
Yes, we should.
Yeah.
So, thanks, Mark. We told these guys to get nerdy on us, which I think they should.
I went off the edge.
No, this is
judging
good.
from the first 2 minutes, I think we're going to get there.
I think we're going to get there.
Maybe.
So, yeah, folks, buckle in. But, yeah, good point. So, we'll talk about what F class is.
What's F class? So, F class is one subset of something that's called high power shooting. You guys have heard of high power shooting at all? Mm-hmm. Sometimes people will say across the course shooting or service rifle shooting. Mm-hmm. So those are kind of different kinds of high power. But high power it's a organized formal competition run by the NRA in this country, and sometimes the NRA, like if you're talking about Australia or another country, their version of the NRA. But it's basically shooting at a known distance at a paper target with bullseye with concentric rings. It's a score game, right? So you're trying to maximize your score. But it differs in terms of the subdiscipline based on, like a service rifle would be 3 positions. It'd be standing, it'd be prone, and it would be either kneeling or sitting. And they use, hence the name, they use a battle rifle. So they use an AR-15. It's supposed to be representative of what the military is training with. So a couple years ago, they caught up with optical sights, and now they allow optical sights on service rifles, which is a little bit more representative. Before then, it was all iron sights. There's another rifle classification within high power shooting, and it's only prone, and it's called match rifle. And those use, instead of scopes, predominantly they use aperture sights. So that's when you see the micrometer adjustable aperture sight on the rear, and then like a globe ladder sight on the front. And those guys can use slings, a shooting jacket. I believe they get one lens that they can put in either their front sight, their rear sight, or they can wear it on their eyeglasses.
What would that do?
Well, it kind of magnifies your sight picture. So it gives you just a little bit more resolution for lining up on that bullseye target.
Wow.
It's interesting. They actually put a lens in their sight.
With irons, yeah.
Yeah, with aperture sights or iron sights. A pretty sophisticated type of iron sight.
Yeah.
So what happened was this sling shooting was real popular, has been for a long time. But there was this competitor up in Canada named George Farquharson. And he said, hey, listen, I really want to keep competing, but I can't focus. I can't get a good sight picture with these aperture sights anymore. Is there something we can do? Could we start a new class that allows people to continue to compete even though they can't focus on their iron sights anymore? And they started what we now know as F class. And F is for his last name, Farquharson. But it had this weird unintended consequence, and that was it would quickly become more popular with all age groups than the original sport that it spun off of. So now you have what you see in front of you is kind of the modern day F-class rifle, and these two rifles fall into one of two categories called FTR, TR for target rifle, or F open, and open is for any caliber 35 or below. To make a car reference, because Jimmy, I know you appeal to some car analogies. This would be like stock car racing.
Okay.
And F open would be like top fuel dragster, maybe. So
all right.
It's a little bit unlimited class. There's weight limits to it. So this has to fall under 8.25 kilograms, which ends up being roughly 18 pounds. And that includes everything that moves when you lift the rifle straight up. So that would include the bipod, anything else that's attached to the rifle.
What would be something that wouldn't move when you pick the rifle up?
So the mat that you shoot on,
Okay.
the shooting mat, and then we use like a rear sandbag for the rear of the butt. And if that didn't move when you picked it straight up, you'd be good. You wouldn't have to include that in your weight.
Noted.
Now, for the F open, for those top fuel dragsters, they get 22 pounds, so 4 pounds more, roughly, and they can shoot off of a mechanical front rest that maybe you see when you go to the range. It's like a tripod, 3 points of contact type of rest where they can sort of dial in some elevation and some windage.
Do they bolt those into the table too, or is that?
No, they've got like spiked feet.
Okay.
And they kind of like press them into the ground if they're shooting off of dirt or gravel or whatever. And those spiked feet kind of help it from, they're pretty heavy too, so they don't really move when you shoot them.
Which is kind of interesting because, that's, these are almost like little mini skis.
Yeah.
Yeah. The bipods, for those listening right now that are on these guns in front of us, like Mark said, it reminded me of looking at when you'll see like a snowmobile.
Yeah.
Because you have the rear butt of the stock is resting on the table right now, and then you have these big bipods that stick out the side, and they have these snowmobile-looking skis.
Yep. So the theory there is if you want to shoot well at long range, there's two different ways you can cope with recoil. One is the more traditional way, and it works real well with like your Harris and your Atlas folding bipods that have rubber feet, is to try and fight the recoil or resist the recoil. Mm-hmm. So those rubber feet are meant to grab the ground, and you've heard of preloading bipods, like to make a good shot when you're hunting. You lean your shoulder into that rifle, you preload the bipod, you hyperextend the legs, and that gives you a little bit of travel within those legs as they rotate before they lock out, and the rifle starts to lift off the ground. And in that time that you've preloaded, the bullet will leave the barrel, and you can't influence it anymore, and you end up making a good shot. The other way to make a good shot at long range with a bipod is to go with the recoil, and that's why these look the way they look. So in that sort of regime, you're promoting the rifle to move rearward. Yeah, so these skis are on here so that movement is predictable, repeatable, smooth, and they sort of track on grass or a fabric surface of your shooting mat. If you notice in the back here, it's hard to see, but you can kind of feel it, Mark. There's like this Teflon tape that's on the butt. So that works in concert with those skis on the bipod to resist friction on the rear bag.
Oh, okay, right.
Yeah, so when you shoot, you're hoping, you're planning for this rifle to move very smoothly rearward. And I've done the calculations, and it actually moves about 1/16 of an inch for the 308 in a 30-inch barrel before the bullet is gone, before it's left.
How in the heck did you do that calculation?
Yeah, it has to do with acceleration of the projectile and its terminal velocity when it leaves the barrel and things like that. And also
I'll explain it to you later, Jim.
Okay.
the moment of inertia of the rifle itself. So this package weighs right at the limit, 18 pounds. So it's going to have a certain amount of inertia before it gets going. And then you factor in the coefficients of static friction between your bipod and whatever it's resting on.
Does that change depending on what it's resting on?
Totally.
Do you know the coefficient of friction for grass and fabric and dirt?
I've got it all listed. Yeah. Yeah. So
perfect.
I mean, these bipods are super interesting. One thing that's pretty obvious when you're looking at it as well is it's got a pretty wide stance.
Yeah.
Versus maybe a more traditional like folding bipod that you're talking about. Is that providing I guess an extra layer of stability? Or I guess what's the reason for that?
Yeah, so it's kind of like what are those boats, catamarans they call them?
Oh yeah, sure.
With like big outriggers and pontoons. So we shoot relatively heavy bullets.
Okay.
Now, since we're trying to shoot as good as we can and resist the wind as well as we can, we shoot heavy for caliber bullets, and because they're long and they have high BCs, we have to twist our barrels pretty fast to stabilize them. So what happens when you twist a barrel real fast, you have now a moment of rotational inertia from the bullet that it imparts on the rifle.
Because the rifling is contacting the bullet, so the bullet is putting an
torque
opposite, like a torque on the barrel.
Yeah, it's almost like a pure torque. Like if we had a high speed and we could do some shooting for this episode, you'd probably see, the right ski lift off the ground just a little bit while it's recoiling.
Okay.
And that's the reaction force that you're getting. It's the reaction moment, actually, that you're getting into the rifle from the bullet. So the wider you can make this, the more you can resist, or your overturning moment that this is pressing on against the ground is a little bit better. So you've got a longer moment arm that you can resist that torque with.
Okay.
But as with anything, humans, when they compete against each other, we're all pretty type A, pretty competitive, so they had to make a limit on how wide this could be because they started getting wider and wider.
That was my next question.
And it was a little bit ridiculous, right? You've got this thing that's starting to become a little less practical than everyone would admit that they want it to be. So they put a limit on how wide it can be. And I forget, it's like 22 inches or something like that. So still not something that you'd see in the field, obviously. But at least it's providing like a solution space that people have to stay in, sort of like any stock car racing,
Yeah. So when you're shooting an F class competition, and we'll get back into the rifle for sure because there are so many more things we need to talk about on these rifles as I'm looking at them. What am I trying to say? What does the competition entail? You're shooting, like you said, 308s at paper targets that are pretty far away.
Yeah.
Is it, like I think of a 3-gun course of fire, and it's like, shoot the targets, don't miss any, do it as fast as you can.
Yep.
That's oversimplified. What are you guys trying to do? How far away are these targets? Is there a set distance that you usually find the targets at?
Yeah.
Are there, is the main challenge just being as accurate as you can, or are there other involved challenges, like are the targets ever moving or anything like that?
Great questions, yeah. So quick disclaimer, I love competitive shooting. I think all these sports are really, really cool. I respect a lot of the skill sets that it requires to do well in 3-gun as well as PRS and things like that. And when you look for commonality within those shooting sports, you ask yourself, well, what's keeping me? What are my main challenges as a shooter? And the thing that contributes to the most uncertainty when you're shooting long range is probably distance. So if you know the distance, you already have a big leg up, right? So this is known distance shooting. Mid-range is classified as 300, 500, 600 yards. And then they've got long range, which is 800, 900, and 1,000, and sometimes 1,200. That's more of an exhibition, but normally it tops out at 1,000 yards. If you're overseas, it'll be 900 meters, which is really close. It's about 990 yards. But so we know the distance. You go to a PRS match, they tell you this target is so far away. You kind of know the distance there. If you're on a long-range hunting trip, you've got a rangefinder, so you can figure out the distance there. So they're all pretty common in terms of that. What's the next biggest influential factor for creating a miss? probably the wind, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you guys do a lot of long range shooting on your own, right? And when you guys are out there recreational shooting, and you're missing at 1,000 yards, oftentimes it's because of the wind.
Oh, yeah.
So we're definitely trying to figure that out, right? The wind, or mastering atmospherics, is probably the number one challenge for F-class shooting. So
Would you say even more so than just being a good trigger puller?
if I had to break it down, you'll get everyone's got their own opinion, but I would say that it's 30% determined at the loading bench, maybe. So how well you can produce really good performing ammunition that works well in the rifle that you've got.
If you're splitting grains.
If you're splitting grain, yeah.
Or, I'm sorry, kernels, not grain.
Right,
Just,
right.
Yeah, kernels.
Yeah.
Don't insult the man, Jeff.
Splitting grains. Jeez, what is this,
Right.
kindergarten?
And I'd say the rest is what we call wind reading, or just sort of like assessing the atmospherics and then consistently making better decisions than the men and women on the line with you at that particular time on when to shoot, where to aim when you shoot. And that's the real pleasurable part. That's the real challenge, and what kind of separates the field when you're competing. So it all has to come down to, wind reading. And it's kind of cool because, we build these fancy rifles, and, that gives us confidence, and there's a little bit of placebo effect probably there, how we think, the rifles are gonna perform really well, and they do. But you can't really whip out your checkbook and win a big match. You have to practice. You have to develop that skill set. And for me, F-class is sort of an excuse to obsess about something. I've got sort of an obsessive personality where I want to dive deep into something. I probably couldn't be good at many things concurrently. So it allows me to do that. And then if I think, well, if I can build that skill set of wind reading, maybe that would help when I go for my next hunt, or maybe that would help, in a different application. So that's kind of like my drive. But to answer your original question, yeah, it's lying prone, getting roughly 60 seconds per shot, so nothing like 3-gun in terms of, having to race.
So there is a time limit.
There's totally a time limit, but they'll say you've got 22 minutes for 2 sighting shots and 20 rounds for record. Your time starts when your target appears.
Sighting shots and then
Yeah.
What shots for record, or what was that?
Yeah. So you pretty much always get sighters. In the United States, it's either unlimited sighters or 2 sighting shots. Overseas, it's usually 2 sighting shots that you can convert for record if you like the result of them.
Oh, that's pretty slick.
Yeah.
Like, you're given the option, you can be like, actually,
Yes.
no, I started.
That's
with
like when
those
you're with your
shots.
buddy out at the basketball court, and you're like, let me try this hook shot. This is just a warm-up. It's not serious. And then you sink it, and you're like, okay, I was trying.
Yep.
Just kidding.
Now it's your
We're
turn.
playing horse
Yeah.
now. We're good.
Yeah. So the rules for the convertibles are you can convert your second shot, or you can convert both sighting shots, but you can't just convert the last one if you like that one the first one if you like that without the second one.
Okay.
But
Okay.
anyway, it's your one chance to gather some empirical data before you go for record. Going for record means, all right, every shot from this point on counts.
Yeah.
And your time is it might be 20 minutes for 20 shots, but that includes your sighters. So a big part of what I've found is a big part of the fun of it is strategy. So within 20 minutes, the wind really changes a lot. So why is that important? Well, there can be good times to shoot and bad times to shoot. If you see a storm front coming in, but it's just a squall out west, and it's going to pass in about 5 to 8 minutes, sometimes a really good strategy is to pull your hood out over your head, cover your ammo, and just you have a little shot timer, and you just watch that timer tick down, and you try to calm yourself while everyone else is losing their mind and freaking out because they're cold and wet and trying to get their shots downrange before the storm comes. And then that squall passes, and what follows a storm, really nice bluebird calm conditions, right, with low wind velocities, and you can really clean up then. But choosing your time when you want to start your record string, I've done. Sometimes it's a gamble. Sometimes it pays off. Sometimes you really kind of get screwed because, you could wait and let that time tick down. You haven't started your record string. You've got 20 to put down range, and now you've only got 5 minutes left, and the wind has picked up in that time.
Ooh.
So now you're shooting in a worse condition than everyone else got to shoot in, and you better hope your pit service is good. Otherwise, you might not get all your shots in before the time expires.
Oh, right.
So talk about pit service. That's actually humans down 1,000 yards away from you in a bunker that are lowering, scoring, marking, and raising a target. So you get to see where your shot went each time. Obviously, we can't see bullet holes at 1,000 yards, but you take turns basically when it's not your relay to shoot. You're getting on a people hauler, going down 1,000 yards downrange, and hiding in an earthen berm and pulling and marking targets for your fellow competitors. So,
and how do they mark? How do they mark the target then?
Yeah, so the target is roughly 5 foot by 5 foot frame with a paper target on it, and it can be on like a Seesaw Gantry type target holder, or maybe like a pipe with chains and plain bearings. But anyway, you pull it down. There'll be a new hole on there. You'll take a scoring disc, and the scoring disc is just like a plastic disc with like a golf tee through it, and you'll put it into the hole that the bullet made. And then you'll take, that's a spotting disc. The scoring disc is like a red or orange disc that will go into a position on the perimeter of the target frame, and the position that it's in corresponds to a value for the shot. So it'll be like X ring, 10 ring, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5. Or if it's a miss, you'll see 2 scoring discs in the lower corner. You run it back up so that the shooter and the person scoring him or her can see the value of the shot and confirm, you scored it correctly or not. They can challenge the score if they think it's touching a line and you screwed up. But that's how they see where the shot went. And
So they're also then factored into your time limit, right? Because you can't just be like, I got a minute left, I got to send 20, because then you got people also trying to do resetting and whatnot.
Yeah, and to be honest, there's some variability in pit service. So, you're supposed to do your best for your fellow competitors, but, every once in a while you've got someone who's really kind of trying to hunt for those shots and taking too long. So the sport is moving towards electronic targets. So our home club, Lodi, here, 30 minutes away, they installed a bunch of electronic targets, and it's the kind of targets that Olympic committees have been using for a long time. And some of them are acoustic, and they triangulate the position of the shot based on the supersonic crack as it goes by. Some of them have vibrational sensors, but in any case, they will autonomously mark the location that your bullet passed through the target, and they'll communicate that back to a tablet or a monitor back at the line of fire. And
is that monitor essentially at where you're shooting? Like you can look down and be like, yep, I can see where that impact was.
Yep, exactly. The only thing is they've put rules in place. Most ranges have, and the ones that haven't should, in my opinion, to create a delay between when you shoot and when you get that information. Because if you get at that information instantaneously, well, now you're changing the essence of the sport. Instead of having to shoot relatively slowly, give the wind time to change, now you have to make an honest read on what the wind is doing now and make a new call, new shot. You can get into a habit that's called chasing the spotter, and that's where you forgo all hope of reading the wind, and you just say, you know what, I'm just going to look to see where my spotter landed on the target, and I'm going to make a full value correction based on that piece of information for my next shot. So does that make sense?
Yeah.
So
you're just basing everything that you're doing off of your last shot rather than actually trying to assess all the situations.
Exactly. And in real world scenarios, you can't do that well because there's enough time delay between shots that the wind will pick up or will die or will reverse. And if you're chasing the spotter and you're blindly, ignoring that information, you're going to blow a 7 out to the left because you didn't catch the reversal. And so people who it's a tempting thing to try in the beginning of your shooting career, but you quickly realize that you get burned pretty quick if you do that. So you're forced to learn to read the wind.
Yeah. So now is the whole point of this then to be like when you get scored, like you said, there's X ring, there's 10, 9, whatever.
Yeah, the 10
You're
ring is
just-
a 1 MOA target. It's a 10-inch.
That's right.
10-inch ring at 1,000 yards is your 10.
Okay.
Your X ring is a 5-inch. It's a half MOA.
Okay. And you're just trying to be the most accurate over the course of however many shots you get
Right.
on the record, right?
You know, just to add, I watched Ian shoot a lot over the last 2 years, and when he talks about sighters, and it's huge how different people, if you walk the line, look at those sighters, they won't believe it. They'll shoot and they'll just go, well, that can't be right, you know. And I just sit there and I'm listening to the different things. The people who use the sighters in the right way, you know, if it's unlimited or if it's your 2 shots, you know, you can tell right away in the next 5 shots that, you know, they didn't believe it, and then they go off and do something, and their score just, and they just,
Yeah.
you know.
Trust your sighters.
Yeah, it's how people mentally use it, and, you know, you really got to know when you crack off that shot. Did you do everything consistently?
Yeah.
Was it you or was it the wind sort of thing?
Trust the information, like you say, Jimmy.
Yeah.
I use my 2 to do something called bracketing. And
Okay.
so I'll be observing the wind for the relay before when it's my turn to shoot. And I'll say, you know what? Okay, the predominant wind is 4 minutes from the left. And it dies out to about 2 minutes from the left. So when it's my turn to shoot, I'm going to pick when I shoot my 2 sighters so that I get no kidding information about how that affects my bullet. I have a rough idea of how it will, you know, but I'm going to wait to shoot one sighter in the strongest wind I think it'll get, and then I'm going to shoot another in the lowest wind or maybe a reversal. So I know, hey, if this happens during the next 15 minutes, I'm going to remember that reversal was good for, you know, a 3-ring left hold or 3-ring right hold or something like that.
Yeah,
Like
yeah,
you said,
okay.
that brackets, you almost kind of get both extremes there.
Exactly.
And
Now
then
you've got a window that you know, okay, this is where I'm going to be playing for the next
So
20
now you
minutes.
know why I watch shooters like him go
Yeah.
out there before you ever get to the line, because you pick up these things and just listening to these shooters and, well, that can't be right, and it's like they're not really using the sighter to the full effect, in my opinion. You know, as a beginner, going, wow, you know,
Which
Oh,
is
yeah,
all that
absolutely. It's
information.
huge,
You can just pull all kinds of information on it, and then reading the Mirage is another thing too, just besides the wind.
Well, that's something I wanted to get into here, because you talk a lot about wind in this case, and wind being a huge factor in, you know, your accuracy. You know, I do want to go backtrack and talk about these rifles and ammunition more, like I said, but wind is a huge thing. When we were doing our long range 1001 and 1002 series, we kind of got into 1002. And honestly, at long range is something you could talk about. It could be, you know, you could go all the way up to 2000 and probably still not have everything down. But wind was one of those things where, in a perfect world, in this vacuum bubble, if we lived in one of those, all you'd have to do is run a ballistics calc, and then you'd hit everything. You'd never
Yeah.
miss.
Yeah.
But wind is this huge equalizer for so many different shooters. And so what you're describing is, let's say you have this wait time, for example, between different shots. The wind might change. This is one thing that's crazy, too. I'd love you guys to go into the fact that I think a lot of people think that if you walk out in the morning and you hold up a blade of grass and you let it drop and it's flowing that way, you're like, well, the wind's going that way today. Wind can change in a matter of minutes, if not seconds. And so I'd love for you guys to talk about that. And then also, I've heard you guys in the past talk about how you're shooting at, let's say, 1,000 yards. The wind might be different at 100, 200, 300, 700, 800, 1,000. And so how are you guys doing that? Does that make you also like a better first-round shooter, even in other situations like hunting? And
Always ask what affects the bullet more. Is it at the muzzle or at the target?
Yeah,
and,
what
and you
would
could
you
talk
guys-
you could talk for hours on this.
Just as a thought experiment, what would you guys say? Like, is it more influential, you know, close by, midway, halfway, or
I
closer to
feel
the
like I've
target?
got inside information.
I feel like I've got inside info.
Yeah.
I definitely thought many moons ago that it would have far more of an impact downrange, because I thought, well, you know, at that point maybe the bullet has gone subsonic, maybe it's not moving as quickly, it's dropping a lot more dramatically,
Yeah.
it's just more prone to, maybe it's wobbling more, whatever, more prone to be carried by that wind. But am I wrong in
Mark?
that?
Like I said, I feel like I've got some inside information there, but I do have some
Cheating on the
questions regarding, I guess. Should I just say what my inside information is?
Yeah. Tell us, set us straight.
At the muzzle.
Yeah.
And,
Which so some people's minds are melted by that. So
it's a little counterintuitive. I would agree with you. Before I knew better, I would have said the exact same thing. How would you explain the why?
I think it's because it's a little bit at the muzzle is huge 1,000 yards away.
because we're dealing in a game of angles.
Exactly.
Correct. Exactly. So
tiny little angle.
tiny
up
little angle
front.
here is nothing, or 100 yards, it's nothing.
Yeah.
Maybe even at 500 yards, it's a little bit. But once it goes to 1,000, it's a big difference.
Because we're
Big
doing,
difference.
you're making triangles. It's
Right, and
triangulation.
that triangle as it travels gets wider and wider and wider. And
Yep.
when you get down to 1,000 yards, it's huge.
Even
Yeah.
if that influence was very local, like it's not a consistent crosswind like we were talking about the whole distance to the target. It was just in that first third, let's say, and then it's dead calm for the 2/3 that follows. It would have done its damage, right? It would have had its influence already, and that
Yeah.
influence propagates on that same angle.
And that
Yeah.
influence, I mean, the way I feel like I understood it explained to me is, I mean, it's essentially that wind at the muzzle essentially points the bullet, sending it on, that vector that extrapolates over distance. Is that right? I mean, or is that bullet just... Because I would think that, like, if it was just, like, pointing straight and it was just, like, this horizontal influence, then it wouldn't be a big deal if it was at the muzzle or downrange or whatever.
Like it could overcome that and get back on track, maybe, or
No, not get back on track, but just like it would be more of a constant influence. Like I guess
Like
what
as
I'm
soon
talking-
as maybe once it got out of that point of wind, would it carry on straight again?
yeah,
Rather than
save for
going
things
off
like
at the
spin
same
drift
angle.
and things like that.
Mhm.
That's very true. So it's a persistent change for that from that influence to the time that it hits the target or whatever. It's going to be on a new course.
Right.
Yeah.
when people say a cartridge, for example, is less affected by wind than another cartridge. Now, is that kind of a misnomer where maybe it is, quote, less affected by wind because you might see less side to side motion when the wind picks up? Like, is that just the result of a faster bullet because it just gets to the target quicker, so it had less time to be in the air and be affected by wind, or are there actually ways that that a bullet can become more aerodynamic or more wind dynamic or something?
Yeah. So if you were to answer the question, like, what is ballistic coefficient? You guys have had some cool podcasts recently about BC and is a bigger number always better and that sort of thing. But I guess to jump to the point, ballistic coefficient is a way to describe a bullet's ability to be less affected by the influence of wind. So if a cartridge, you got the bullet and you got the cartridge, if someone says this cartridge is less affected by wind, it's less affected by virtue of not only the bullet in its shape and its BC, but also the external ballistics that it starts out with, right? So it's muzzle velocity. And so it'd be an oversimplification to say it's always BC or it's always muzzle velocity, or it's always inertia, which is actually wrapped up into BC. But it's a function of all those things. And that's kind of like why, it's very rare to have a 308 in an FTR gun, even though they compete in separate classes, beat out an F open gun that's shooting a 300 Winchester short mag. One of your favorite cartridges. Yeah, that's it's actually like right now, kind of the prince of the F open world is the 300 Wisdom. I know.
Really?
I shouldn't have said that, but
I should get.
No,
dude,
he's
I'm
never
gonna
going to shut up about it.
I'm gonna take the old 8-volt. You're gonna see me on the course here very shortly.
Yeah,
Oh,
well, the
man.
thing is,
I
like,
can't wait
that's
to see that.
that's one of the great things about F Open is a guy who's enamored with his new Ruger American in 6.5 Creedmoor. It qualifies.
Really?
You can go and win a match with it.
So it doesn't qualify for this one that you're the FTR because you have to be a 308 in an
Or a
FTR?
223.
Or a 223.
Yeah, so this
Okay.
was kind of born out of like, okay, what are the standard NATO cartridges? We'll have that be the restriction. And then open is, like I said, 35 caliber and less.
why on God's green earth would you want to run a 223 out to 1,000 yards versus a 308?
But for the mid, the 3, 4, and 5, the
Super
shorter range,
competitive
it's
for
very
mid-range.
Do you
It's
have
really
your choice?
competitive,
Is
yeah.
it, does
I
it
mean,
have
would
any
a person maybe
advantage?
be
Yeah.
shooting a 308 against a person who's shooting a 223?
Yeah, they
Yeah.
compete against
At
each other.
Same time.
Yep.
Yeah.
It's
Okay.
your choice which one you want to use.
And people actually do use the 223.
I've seen them beat 308s multiple times at those mid-range distances. I think it has something to do with, perceived recoil being that much less. People just shoot them really accurately. Oftentimes, if you're trying to get a really young shooter into the sport, it's a great gateway drug for them, Yeah.
Yeah,
But,
all about gateway drugs here.
Yep.
And they make some long
MC Ryan, edit.
high
edit.
BC 223. You'll see some high BC 223 rounds, 90 grain and above now. I gotta take a drink here.
How many grains are the 308 rounds that you guys are sending down?
So-
how heavy are they? So they're heavier than normal.
Yeah, so they're 200 grains right now is kind of the
yeah.
sweet spot. Yeah,
You said 200?
200, yeah.
What kind of a bullet is it? Is it like I imagine there's probably more than one kind, but
Yeah.
is it like, are you using kinds with the polymer tips on them? Are you using I don't know enough.
Yeah,
about
it's
bullets.
not state of the art in terms of construction. It's like your typical lead core, copper jacket, open tip match bullet.
Okay.
Like you've seen
Okay.
Sierra Match Kings forever and Burger hybrids and things like that. Those are the bullets that are consistently winning and at the top.
I think a lot of those are like, to make that comparison, those are what, like 178s or something like that?
Yeah.
178 grain?
That's-
so versus like 200, which
Yeah.
you guys are pushing.
Yeah, so now all the major manufacturers offer 200 plus grain 30 caliber bullets.
cool.
Some of them specifically for F class. But it's not your dad's 308. That's the other thing. Like you're limited by that cartridge, right? And referees come and they have go no go gauges that they'll slip a fired case into. And if your fired case doesn't go into that go gauge, you're disqualified and you're off the range. Or similarly, if they can prove through like a chamber gauge that you've extended your headspace to get a little extra internal volume, you get DQ'd as well. So
Are they spot checking that? Or is like everybody's going through the, like,
yeah, you could shoot a local match and you'll never get checked. It's pretty rare actually at local matches, but like, international matches, especially national championships, they'll check, as do they check the weight. So you're limited to this 308 cartridge in external dimensions. What can you do to increase its performance? Well, one thing that people have done is they've gone to small primer brass. So for anyone that shoots a 6.5 Creedmoor, Lapua came out with some small primer brass for that, and there's some inherent benefits. The web of the case gets stronger, so it can resist a little bit higher pressures. So you can drive the cartridge to a little bit higher pressures.
Because it has a smaller hole in it for the primer.
More to the point, it has more brass around inherently
more material?
weak part of the case, yeah.
Okay.
So just more material. It's thicker and it's stronger.
Okay.
The primer pocket itself, because it's surrounded by so much more brass, it's less prone to loosening up for successive reloads. And we throat our chambers out pretty long. So that's the part of the chamber that it's like the no man land between the end of the mouth of the case and the beginning of the rifling. And
Is that where we were previously talking about jump and
yeah,
I don't remember what the other opposite of jump was. Jump and jam.
jam. There
Jam.
you go.
So you guys
Yep.
are jumping?
Yeah. So for team shooting, so this is an individual and a team sport, but for team shooting, it's really important to jump the bullet, not to jam the bullet, because every once in a while there'll be a ceasefire called by a line official, and you'll have to open your action and show safe. Well, if you jam, like Paul and Scott and those guys were discussing in the previous podcast, you could leave a bullet stuck in your rifling, powder all over your action, powder in your fire control unit. You're kind of out of commission then. So for team shooting, it's really important to jump. I think some people still jam for individual competitions. I think that's a liability as well. I always jump just I don't have to worry about it. Otherwise, people have all these workarounds where they're carrying around compressed air with them or a cleaning rod to, get the bullet unstuck and things like that. But yeah, so we throat our chambers out long, and the reason why we do that is then we can seat the bullet a little bit further out, and it gives us a little bit more powder capacity. I know it sounds trivial, but a little bit extra can, push you to that higher accuracy node, higher velocity accuracy node. So, for example, this rifle here, it's tuned right now to shoot a 200 grain bullet out of a 308 at close to 2,700 feet per second.
Wow.
Oh, wow, yeah. Okay.
Which, you'd be hard pressed to go out and buy ammo that performs like that.
Yeah. How do you tune the rifle? How does that happen? What do you...
Yeah, that's a great question too. I'll tell you how I do it, and you might have a little bit different method.
Yeah.
But
Well, especially when you talk about jumping and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, do you jump?
Oh yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and it depends on the bullet too. Some
Big jumper.
Big jumper over here.
Some bullets don't like to be jumped. The bullet that I was introduced to by Ian, the 200 grain bullet that we're shooting, likes to be jumped, and depending on the wear of your throat too, the more you shoot your gun, the throat erodes away. His is brand new compared to this one, but this is still hyper accurate. But I have to jump the bullet, so I go through reloading and all that stuff, and I'll shoot different bullet or take the bullet and seat it at different depths, and then shoot it and see which ones perform the best. So when I go out there, I know my load to get that. I'm shooting at 2682, I think, is my average velocity out of this gun, give or take 5 or 6 feet per second. But
oh man,
yeah,
got a little work to do there still.
I know he's like, just go shoot.
He loads better ammo than I do. For me, it's lost in the noise at this point. I'm not a good enough shooter to realize the benefit, I think.
2-time national champion, not a good enough shooter.
I rack and stack the variables a little bit differently, I think.
Yeah. So I go out there, and when you reload and find that nodes, like he was talking about, we shoot with Doppler radar.
Okay.
So we don't have a normal chronograph. We'll have a Doppler radar set up next to us, a little personal Doppler radar. So
you mean
we
like
can,
one of those little white spaceships that you like steal it from the tower in the middle of the city?
Yeah, we can pick up the weather fronts coming in too from Channel 27. But no, it looks like a PC really.
Yeah.
You sit on its end and it'll shoot down, and we can get Doppler reflection out to a little over 100 yards with our 30 caliber gun. So we collect a lot of velocity data, and we reload to try and get nodes where that bullet really likes to be at for speed. And then once I find that node, then I'll start working with seating depth to figure out where I want to jump my bullet, where it pulls the group in. So that's how I go through it, and it can take a while. But the thing is, I'll get everything, the velocity stuff, and get everything set up at 100 yards, and then I go to 1,000 yards and never go back to 100, because it really doesn't matter. I can make really small holes at 100 yards, and but it doesn't matter because at 1,000 it's totally different.
Yeah.
Okay. So I want to see how that bullet is. The water line we talk about is the line that goes right through the center of the X. So I want to make sure my velocities stay close enough so I'm at 1,000 yards, my line is like this, and then I have to worry about the wind. So if I can have a tuned cartridge that my water line is where I want it, it's nice and flat within, a couple inches, then all I have to do is now it's me against the wind, really.
Okay.
So why is vertical dispersion so important for a scoring game like this?
It keeps you in the ring.
It keeps you in the fat part of the ring.
Right.
Yeah.
So the fat part of the ring, what he's talking about, the circle, so it's around here instead of up and down. You don't want to be off to the left here, and all of a sudden the ring's like this, and you're out here because you're
because it's a circle.
It's a circle.
Yeah,
it's not, so you want to be in that fat part.
Give yourself the most leeway.
Yeah. So you want to get a cartridge that is very consistent.
In the dead center of a circle, if you go all the way to the left and all the way to the right, let's say that's 10. Now go to the bottom third or the top third of the circle. You could go all the way to the left, all the way to the right, and it might be 7. As far as like inches or whatever unit of measure you're using, you just have less elbow room vertically.
That's right.
Yeah, once you go up.
And
down.
there's nothing more
Makes sense.
aggravating than like in a really hard day and you make some superstar wind call and it's a perfect 12 o'clock 9 or 6 o'clock 9. And you're like, man, if my gun was just shooting a little bit flatter or with a little bit less dispersion, that would have been a 10 or an X.
Right.
Interesting.
So
yeah.
I try to take everything out of it so that it's me making a wind call and a good trigger pull. And he's helped me out tremendously, showing me all the different things and the setup and the consistency of it. But
So you're saying
to get a good score, you really got to, start with a good cartridge, a good reload. Get it tuned for my gun. And this was started out as his, and it's changed a little bit from when he had it.
Yeah.
But we're still pretty close in the same ballpark.
Yeah.
So most of your tuning is coming from the ammunition then, right? Or are there
Except
things
for-
that you're doing to the rifle then?
Now he's doing some stuff
Yeah,
here.
what is this? You got like a, I don't
a
even know
weird
how to explain this.
contraption.
It looks like a plasma cannon on the end of your.
Pretty sure I can hook my garden hose to it.
Yeah,
It's a
this
quick
is, Yeah,
detach.
this is your quick, I don't want to actually touch it. I didn't change anything, Ian, don't worry.
All right, so this is going to be a little bit more nerdy, and I promise to give like the top level of it. But tuning a rifle, you guys have heard of things like barrel harmonics, and vibration and things. So when a ballistic event happens and this bullet is going through this barrel, it's a lot more dynamic than people realize. If they see high-speed footage, it would look like it's a wet noodle almost, And the analogy I like to use is like high-pressure water going through a garden hose as soon as you turn the tap on for the first time. What happens to that garden hose? It goes through these big, displacements and everything as the water is traveling through it. Same thing happens to the barrel. It moves in a couple different waveforms, but let's just say the most prominent waveform is a sinusoidal wave that's moving longitudinally like this, okay? So under that assumption, and remember I told you that, whether it's a couple hundred milliseconds or I forget the exact time split, but it takes time for that bullet to travel down that barrel as it's moving. So suffice to say that when it exits the muzzle, that muzzle has an attitude or it's pointing in a certain direction. You're like, well, pointing towards a target. Of course, it's pointed somewhere. But it's actually got a very local attitude at the very end of the muzzle, okay? Mm-hmm. And what you're doing when you're finding a node or when you're tuning a rifle is you're finding an advantageous attitude of that muzzle to have all your bullets exit, okay? And I'm going to take that one step further. So there's this consensus that's forming. Some people knew about it decades ago, but within the precision rifle sports, it's just starting to gain a foothold, and people are realizing it's a true phenomenon called positive compensation. So positive compensation means that no matter how anal you get with your reloading, you'll always have a gradient of velocities. You'll always have one round that's going faster than another, and every other round is going somewhere in between.
Plus or minus 5 or 6. What was that?
5 or 6 feet per second?
Per
Yeah.
second.
For me, it's more than that. It's probably twice that. But what you're doing is you're tuning this barrel so that delta in velocity actually works in your favor. And how could that be? I mean, shooting sports are all about being consistent, right? Well, if you have some variability in your muzzle velocities and you time it so that the barrel at the very end of the muzzle is actually rising, it's on an upsweep, so it'll go up and then it'll pause at some amplitude, and then it'll go down and it'll pause at some local minimum. If you time it so that all of your bullets are exiting somewhere in that upsweep of the barrel, what happens is the bullet that's a little bit faster than its litter mates is exiting a little bit sooner, right? So the attitude of the barrel is a little bit lower. Now it's going faster. It starts out with an advantage. The runt of the litter, the slow guy, is exiting later in time, so that barrel is up like this when it exits, okay? So inherently, it's slower. It's going to take longer to get to the target, but you've just given it a little bit of a head start because now it's got an angle of inclination compared to its fast.
Little oomph.
Yes.
If you're gonna try and get something a long way, but you can't throw it very hard, you aim up.
There you go. That's perfect.
Yep.
Whereas if you've got something that you can just totally manhandle and just throw it super quick,
Sidearm like
sidearm
Brett
it.
Favre.
Yeah,
Yep.
exactly. Okay,
Yep.
you can be a gunslinger.
So that velocity node is when you get that consistency at that velocity.
Well, the velocity is just like an indirect way of measuring one way to tune a rifle.
Right.
So what I do, right, is I use velocity to find out, and I use bullet impact at distance that I'm going to be competing at, 800 yards, 900 yards, whatever. I look for a spot where I get convergence downrange. So think about those two extremes, right? The slow one and the fast one. They're gonna converge. They're gonna diverge for a while, right? They'll be going on separate paths, and they'll get pretty far away from each other, relatively speaking, halfway to the target. But then they're going to actually converge because the faster one is going to, keep its linear velocity a little bit more efficiently than the slower one. The slower one had a head start, so it's above the faster one. But guess what? It's going to lose its velocity a little bit more quickly.
Huh.
So they'll end up actually hitting the target at roughly the same point of impact on the target.
How can you tell if your bullet is leaving the barrel when it's on its way up or when it's on its way down? Like, are there things happening downrange on the target that you're seeing? Are you using like the world's awesomest slow-mo camera?
Yeah.
Are you like what?
Yeah, so it's an obvious question, yeah. And the answer is you're looking at a relative point of impact at the target. You can tell by the behavior of where those holes appear based on their velocity. You know the velocity of each shot, right? We've got the Doppler radar set up. We know that, hey, shot number 4 was the slowest. You know exactly where shot number 4 hit on the target, and it happens to be in line or on that same water line as shot number 10, which was the fastest. That phenomenon only happens when you have positive compensation. So you know, hey, I'm on the upsweep of the barrel. I know I'm getting PC or positive compensation. This is a good place to be. If you're away from that, if you're one cycle of that sinusoidal waveform away from that, then you get the opposite effect. The fast bullet is leaving at a higher incident angle than the slow bullet.
So it's high. It
Yep.
winds up hitting the target high.
Way high compared
and
to
your slower one winds up hitting way low.
Way low.
Because it had a disadvantage right out of the gate.
Yep. And so now your vertical dispersion might be 3 times that.
This is amazing. Now, how can you change this? Are you changing with this weight on the end of the barrel? Is that somehow, are you influencing how much the barrel whips and at what time it's
Exactly.
whipping by the weight that's on the end of it?
Yeah, so you heard us say that you can tune a rifle, and more specifically like a barrel, by charge weight of your powder or velocity. So you can do that, but another way to do it, and we, in the centerfire guys, these long-range guys, we sort of borrowed it from the rimfire crowd because they can't really load their ammo, right? They're stuck with what they have. So they started using these things called barrel tuners, and that's what this thing is. And it's a way of influencing the center of gravity of this barrel, and as a result, the moment of inertia of the barrel. So what happens is as you move this ring on the outside, you're actually taking this mass right here and you're putting it further away from the muzzle of the barrel. So in a sense, you're increasing the length of your barrel. So remember back to like high school physics class when you're talking about structural members or whatnot. For a given mass, the shorter and heavier profile of that member, it's going to be stiffer, right? And when it vibrates in that waveform, that sinusoidal waveform, do you think the frequency of that vibration would go up or down for a stiff barrel, like a short, fat barrel? The frequency would be high.
High.
The amplitude would be low. So it would.
It's not making big sweeping movements. It's just making short little.
Exactly, because it's stiff, right?
Okay, yeah.
You take that exact same amount of steel and you reduce the barrel contour, let's say, and you make it a little bit longer, and you shoot the exact same round through it. It's going to have a lower frequency, but it's going to have higher amplitude. So higher amplitude is actually it's a little bit counterintuitive because for years we were told that short, stiff barrels are more accurate.
The bull barrels.
The bull barrels, exactly. And
which, I mean, you guys do. I mean, these barrels aren't by any means like
they're not featherweights.
Featherweights or what are they, Senderos or whatever.
Right.
Not that, but
right. But a little bit of barrel movement is actually advantageous if you're trying to achieve positive compensation. So by moving this tuner, adjusting this tuner, you're changing in a very small way. You're changing the CG of that barrel, and you're changing how it moves, how it's whipping by the time the bullet gets to the end of the muzzle. They call that barrel time. So you're optimizing the barrel time for the attitude.
So you're getting a more consistent. We're all going towards a more consistent position of the barrel then?
Well, you're looking for a specific point in time that you want all your projectiles to leave the barrel. So what happens is the guys who really know what they're doing, I'm not there yet. I just started experimenting with that as a way to tune when I travel to matches. But the guys who really know what they're doing, apparently, they say that you tune this barrel at 70 degrees Fahrenheit. You go across the country and you shoot a match at 50 degrees Fahrenheit. Your ammo is going to be a little bit slower because of the ambient temperature.
Yeah.
And you can actually compensate for that with this barrel tuner. So the theory is it's going to take longer for that bullet to get to the muzzle, and to get it to exit at the spot that you want it to, you actually have to slow the whip of the barrel down. And you do that by moving this counterweight outboard. Opposite would hold true too. You go to a really hot part of the country or time of year, you want to move that weight inboard so that you increase the frequency of vibration here.
I mean, you're essentially putting less or more air underneath that football,
Yeah, absolutely.
Mark, that's why you can't get rid of that donut on your 300 Wisdom.
I want it off.
Everybody says you look dumb with it, but you're more accurate with it.
I know.
Is that like one of those de-resonator?
It's it's one of those things. It doesn't
That
go
rubber-
on the end of
that
the barrel,
rubber
but it's
thing?
it's a donut.
Oh, that's something different. It does contribute to CG and stuff, but I think it's dampening a lot of the noise in your barrel. So I think, we talked about that big waveform that the barrel moves in. There's other ones. There's like little compression waves that move through your barrel and longitudinal ones. And I think that's absorbing a lot of that movement and making it a more pure waveform. So
Interesting.
they do look kind of ugly, don't they?
It's just like a totally like a cosmetic pride thing. And then my dad called it one thing one time, and I did try to get it off the other day.
It's stuck
on there pretty good. I was like,
It's a sign.
Now, Niles, you're not using one of these bad boys here,
No.
but you're more into the loading up the super crazy good ammo.
Trust me, if he makes it work, it gets it done, probably on my next one or whatever. You never know, because we're all like these frustrated golfers and got to tweak things. We can't just let well enough alone until he hits me and says, quit playing with the reloads and just go shoot now. You're fine.
Yeah.
We make fun of it, but there's actually like this real placebo effect to doing a lot of these things.
Yeah.
It's like having your lucky charm, when you go to do something important or whatever. And if he believes in his heart of heart that it will make a difference on paper, on target, then absolutely he should keep doing it to the degree he's doing it, because it's so mental.
Right. We were talking about that before we started, about how people will trim their bullets and then point their bullets, and scientifically that's counterintuitive. You shouldn't really trim them. You can point them and get a better BC, but once you trim them, you shorten them. They change the BC, and pointing them is not going to make it any better than it was when you first started, sort of thing. And there's scientific stuff out there that some people have written about that shows that, but people still do it.
This is mind-boggling. Now let's keep moving on. Both of you guys have Velcro on your barrels, so Niles, will have you explain this one maybe to start out. What's with the Velcro on your barrels?
Okay.
What do you?
What was a major problem shooting indoors after you shoot 1 or 2 rounds down a barrel?
Mirage.
Bingo. So we Velcro a Mirage shield underneath this when you're out there.
Yeah.
A lot of times you don't really need it, depending on the weather, but if you get into the right environment and your barrel's really got you don't want to see the Mirage here as much as you want to see it downrange.
Yeah.
So you put the Mirage shield on it so the heat will go out to the outside of your scope.
From the barrel as you're shooting,
Correct.
as you've been lobbing some rounds down. So Mirage is something where we could almost take another. We're already a smidge over an hour here, but this has been so interesting. We're just going to keep going. Darn it,
keep her moving.
Keep her moving. But Mirage is something that you could have an entire podcast on. I'm sure we've even talked about it a lot in the Long Range 1002. So you have Mirage at the barrel. First off, what is Mirage again? It's like light being weird. We in Long Range 1002 we were like we said that the PRS guys in the room admitted that there was such a thing as Mirage. They said that the FCAS guys are the ones that actually know what to do with it. They're the ones that actually can see air and watch it work.
Over a hot parking lot's a perfect place to do it on a sunny day, and it just looks like waves. The air's got waves in it.
Yeah.
So you know how like with different lenses within the scopes we make, there's indices of refraction.
Okay.
The same thing can be said for any medium that light is traveling through, and atmosphere, air is one of those medium. And if it's at a different temperature gradient, its index changes just a little bit. So you're seeing a local temperature gradient somewhere downrange. Usually it's like classic inferior mirages where you have hot radiant heat coming off the ground and the surrounding air is relatively cool compared. And you have like these warm air thermals that are moving up.
Okay.
That might be superior mirage, but inferior, yeah, that's right. Inferior is the opposite, where you might be out at sea and the water temperature is colder than the air temperature, and you actually have the exact opposite. Where
don't people almost see where in the sky it looks like a reflection of the ocean is in the sky?
That's exactly right.
Or then when you see the kind that's the superior, it's where it looks like the sky is on the ground.
Yep, and that's the classic, like when you're in the desert and you think you see a lake.
Right.
It's actually the sky. Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's light being bent or refracted on its way to your optic or your eye. And you have to learn to not only deal with it, but make it your friend, use it.
It can actually cause you to miss because it can make you think a target is somewhere that it's not, right?
That's really common. Yeah, actually. So two things that exacerbate mirage are temperature gradients and then moisture in the air, because you get a little bit of water vapor. Now that's a different medium as well, which has a different index of refraction. So the worst possible scenario is one of those winter days where you've got snow on the ground and the sun is in full effect, and it's evaporating a lot of that moisture into the air, because now you've got a big temperature gradient, and you've got a lot of moisture that's coming with those thermal.
It just sucks to be outside on those days anyway.
Yeah,
because you look down and there's cold air on your lower half, and you look up and you're like sweating up top because the sun is anyway.
So
that's just a personal gripe. It has nothing to do with shooting.
On a day like that, your target, let's say you're shooting at 1,000, your target will look a full minute different than reality. And in that scenario, it'll look like your bullseye is higher than it actually is. And so you have to learn to recognize that. And what I do is there will be a moment in time where like the wind just stops, and it's usually only like a second or a fraction of a second, or a moment in time when the wind sort of reverses. And when that happens, you'll be looking through your scope at the target, and the bullseye will look like it just snapped down for a second. And it usually doesn't last very long. But you take a picture with your mind's eye, and you say, wow, that was 7/8 of a minute, or maybe a full minute on one of those bad days. And then from that point on, you trust that, and it's like using the force, and it's like, okay, I'm going to hold a full minute low, knowing that that's where my target is. Wow. If I don't want to compensate with, the turrets or something like that.
Wow.
Yeah.
I feel like when you said that, it looks like the target jumps down. There's one of those, when you watch movies and there's the pre-roll things that say like who was involved in making the movie. You'll see the Pixar light bulb or whatever jumping around, and there's like a bad robot or whatever. One of those people has their pre-roll 10 seconds of something downrange that has Mirage in front of it, and it looks like it's moving. Anyway.
No.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So now I'm going to notice that every time I watch that movie that I can't think of.
I mean, not that I watch cartoon movies. I just
the kids.
Yeah. But so you've got Mirage downrange. You can read it too, because the wind can push it.
Yeah.
Right. That's one weird thing that people say all the time. They say you mentioned Niles. You said reading Mirage.
Just like
which
reading the
is-
wind, except you can actually see.
You can see the wind
you can see
happening
it.
downrange. How does one read Mirage at 300? And then, because you guys can do this. This is something super cool that I learned about F-class shooters that really start to understand how this works. You can read Mirage at 300, and you can read Mirage at 700 or 800 or whatever. That are doing different things because the wind is acting differently at those different distances.
Yeah.
How does that happen? You have to how are you seeing a
how
target
do you
and
separate
seeing-
that? It seems like it'd just be layered on top of one another.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah. So it's actually changing your focal distance dynamically as you're laying down there shooting. So one of the ways you can do that is two most popular products, Vortex products in F-class are our Golden Eagle rifle scope as well as our Razor spotting scope. That 85 millimeter angled eyepiece Gen 2 spotter is like now the most popular spotting scope in all of F-class. And what people will do is they'll take a census of the wind on the infield, and they'll start at the target, and they might move that focus wheel and back off to 800 yards and say, okay.
You're purposely then starting to make the target out of focus.
Exactly. But other things come into focus.
Okay.
And what you want to find are areas of color contrast, like our number boards, which are above or below our targets, are black and white. So that's a classic feature, like the edge of a number board, or maybe where it goes from black to white on a letter on the number board. Mirage really stands out well. It's easy to read it. It's easy to see it on areas of contrast. So there will be like service roads, gravel roads that go across the range, sometimes at 500, 600, 800 yards. And you go to the edge of one of those service roads, and there'll be grass on either side of the gravel. It's a perfect horizontal line that you can use to read Mirage. But yeah, so they'll take that wheel and they'll be focusing closer and closer to themselves, and they'll get a read of that Mirage at maybe 3 or 4 different distances. And then oftentimes they'll say, okay, I think the predominant Mirage that I'm going to dope off of is the 600-yard Mirage, and they'll go back to 600 yards. They'll leave that spotting scope there for the whole string that they shoot. Their scope will be focused at the target, and they'll constantly go back and look at that spotting scope as they're shooting.
See if anything's changed.
Exactly, yeah. They're getting their ground truth from that spotting scope, and they're executing the shot in the rifle scope. I do something a little bit different, where I like to compromise, and what I do is I use this aperture stop ring that comes with the Golden Eagle on the objective.
So wait a minute. You've made your objective smaller.
Which is supposed to be bad, right?
Well, Mark.
I mean, I'm not going to tell you not to do it.
Big objective Mark Boardman over here.
Yeah.
Anyway.
So yeah, if I was like concerned primarily with the twilight hours of hunting, I wouldn't mess with this. But for our sport, what's cool is you can decrease your objective and increase your depth of focus downrange. So why is that valuable? Well, I can make more timely decisions on changes with the wind while staying in the rifle scope, and I've got the target more or less in focus. It's in serviceable focus, but I can see Mirage. Let's say I'm shooting 1,000 yards. I can see that 600-yard Mirage with this in place. So it's pretty effective.
You have
Does that
more
allow-
in focus.
Right, it's like for camera buffs, it's changing your f-stop. You're going from an f3 or f2.5, really big aperture, down to an f16, so that you have more in focus. You get more depth in that picture.
Okay.
So he can see that Mirage at 600 and his target at 700 by using that ring, and that's included with the scope.
Does that allow you, I guess, as opposed to like going back to the spotter to make calls like more real time? Like, I know exactly what's going on right now. I want to execute that shot now.
Exactly. So the information that you get is it's only growing stale. Like if you wait and you are taking a long time to make your decision, the better you can process the information and make a good decision and then act on that decision, the better you'll score. So that's kind of what the theory is there. And the weird thing is with this aperture stop ring, you guys know, like with the light that enters your scope, you've got, chief rays that are entering the very center, and then you've got marginal rays that are kind of entering around the perimeter of your objective. A lot of the aberration that just comes as part and parcel of any optical prescription is born out of those marginal rays. Like that's kind of where the spherical aberration lives, and
you're kind of giving up not the premium part of the scope, right?
Bingo.
Oh, you're keeping
the good stuff.
The good stuff.
Yeah,
I see.
You can take it too far. If let's say you had an iris up here and you adjusted it so that it was only like a few millimeters. Well, now your exit pupil, imagine that you're at 60 power and you've reduced your front objective clear pupil to like 10 millimeters. You'd have like a 0.6 millimeter.
So there's a balance to be struck.
There is, and you start sacrificing the good light too if you go too close to the center.
Interesting.
So, and you need enough ambient light in the day to make use of this. Like if it's a really dark, cloudy day, I'll take this off because it's just cutting down too much.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Now, Ian, when you shoot, you don't shoot at 60. Do you usually like back it off so you can? When I do it, I sort of back off so I can see like a little more couple wind flags as well as my target just off the edge, so I can make that wind call as well.
Yeah, we're running a little long here, but
we're good. Keep going.
Forever.
Yeah, keep going.
So basically, if there's not a whole lot going on, if it's not a real challenging day, usually in the morning, I'll go ahead and shoot right at 60 for sure. Mm-hmm. If there's stuff changing upfield, so a lot of these 1,000-yard ranges are really wide, and you can see wind changes that are affecting your competitors on the far end of the range. They haven't gotten to you yet, and you can actually see them coming across the range.
Oh, seriously?
Seriously, yeah.
So how are you seeing that?
Yeah, so you see,
because you're also shooting, right?
Yeah, you're
shooting.
You
have like 7 eyes?
Yeah, so what I do is I take the scope and I'll say, you know what, I want to see the change before it gets to me. I'll dial it down to something like 30 power maybe, which seems like a lot still.
That's all.
Yeah.
Right. We'll get into the scopes of F-class. That we're saving that for last. Just, everybody's listening to Vortex Nation podcast. I'm going to make sure it doesn't seem too...
Sure, commercially,
anyway,
right.
Yeah.
So, so a paltry 30 power, and that way I've got this giant field of view, and I can see...
That's huge.
Oh, it's picking up over here, and it's going to get to me in about 5 seconds. So I'm going to shoot one more time, and then I'm going to make an adjustment.
Wow.
You can hear him. You can hear him swear too as the wind comes across.
That's an indicator. That's a wind indicator.
Yeah, it is.
The wind indicator is.
You can hear the cusses
as the moans come across the field.
So do you is it an ideal position to be in the middle of the pack? Do you not want to be one of the guys on the far outer perimeter of the shooting group?
I'd say, generally speaking, you're right. And that's usually because there's a big berm on either side of the range, and the wind does some funky stuff when it comes up over the berm or gets ready to come over another berm. So usually you don't want to be on the perimeter or the edges too much.
Yeah.
But it's nice to be in the middle because then you can also look at your fellow competitors' targets and see, well, he just got screwed. I'm sure
that berm does a lot, because you look at they did that study on truck beds, like people driving trucks, and guys would leave their tailgates down because they thought that it would be more aerodynamic for the air not to get caught in the bed. But they actually found that the air coming over the streamline of the truck, over the top of the roof, it would actually create a pillow of air inside of the truck's bed that would almost just stay there and circulate. And then that would create this pressure that would just cause the rest of the air coming over the truck to just go over that pillow of air, so to speak. Pillow is like the total wrong term. But
you're talking about a turbulent boundary layer.
Yeah, like I'm sure if you're right up next to that berm, you might end up with this kind of turbulence going on in front of you.
Yep. Sort of like dimples on a golf ball. You're creating that boundary layer so that it's a little bit.
We can talk about that on some of the bullets are being made now too.
No way. Bullets look like golf balls?
No, they're
okay.
No, but what the new
I got really excited.
The new rage is actually to artificially create the impetus for a turbulent boundary layer by putting like a little fiducial mark on the ogive of your bullet. So it's a die that creates a little ring that goes around, a couple millimeters behind the behind the point of the bullet, and the air catches that feature and creates a turbulent boundary layer over the rest of the bullet, and you increase your BC that way.
It's like a force field.
Yeah.
Around the bullet.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
Yep.
Well, gosh, this stuff is so cool. We're almost going to have to call this like long range 1003 because we talked about
Dude,
F
I was
class.
going to say, we're on like 1012 right now.
Right.
I've still got questions that need to go way, way back.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I mean, in order to understand everything that's going on with F class, I mean, you got to, this is like long range shooting in its purest form. You're not running, we talked in the PRS one, there's one where you had to set up a fort. You know, like you had to build your position basically before you shot, and you have to shoot, you're going super fast, you know, and you're trying to be accurate. And don't get me wrong, those guys are very accurate.
Oh, yeah, that's phenomenal.
This is precision shooting just boiled down to you just got to shoot precise.
Well, and then you're just processing so much information.
Yeah.
Yeah. Mark, shoot out some of your questions here that you got before we jump into this scope. I feel like we'll talk about the old Golden Eagle, the scope that's allowed us to even talk about F class around here in general. We'll leave that for our last call, essentially.
Sounds good. So here's my going way back questions. We talked a little bit about being on the line, right? Like, and a 20-minute time limit. How many times? Like, I guess in the context of an F class match. How many times are you shooting throughout the day? Are you shooting one time for 20 minutes? How many shots are you firing during that 20-minute time period?
Yeah.
How many people are shooting at a time? I guess it depends on how big the match is and the range. But
Right. Yeah. So like, usually you're shooting 3 to 4 times, and each time you're shooting either 15 or 20 rounds for record. So you could shoot 80 rounds a day, not including sighters. And if it's a big tournament, you might do that for 4 or 5 days in a row. So it becomes almost like this endurance. You're trying to keep your mind fresh. You're trying to keep hydrated so your eyes don't dry out, so you can still read the wind on day 4, day 5. Yep. And so that's you're shooting about 100 rounds a day. It doesn't really get over that, but accumulate that over 4 or 5 days, and that's why you don't see, even though it would be legal, you don't see 338 Lapuas dominating F Open, and people just can't shoot well.
Right.
Oh, it's
for that many shots.
A lot to handle.
Yeah.
No muzzle brakes can be used or suppressors. I think that's
we're trying to get that changed. We're trying to kind of overturn that, but
that's the only muzzle device you can have as a tuner, correct?
That's right.
Yeah.
When you talk about a suppressor too, like I was thinking, with that many people on the line, that's got to be maybe impacting your shots. I know when I've shot next to other folks, they break a shot, right when you're trying to, crack one off, and you're like, oh wait, hold on a second.
Oh yeah.
It would be really pleasant if those were allowed and everyone had access to them. It would be. I mean, just not having to double up on your hearing protection so you can hear range calls more effectively. It's a big deal for safety. So that would be great if we could have that.
Now, Niles, you were talking earlier about like fouling your barrel and all that stuff. At some point, does your barrel reach a certain level of foulty, if you will, that over the course of shooting hundreds of rounds over the a few days, it doesn't really make a big difference?
And so that's in my log when I shoot. Okay. When's the last time I cleaned it? How many shots did it take so that it became consistent where I was shooting it at 1,000? And then how many shots can I shoot before I have to clean it?
Okay.
So I keep that, that all depends on the powder you're using, the primer, everything. So everybody's going to be a little bit different. The gun's going to be a little bit different. The type of rifling you use, it will be different on how it is all affected. With my gun, with the way it is now, if I clean it, I mean just clean it completely down to everything, I got to shoot about 20 to 25 rounds.
Oh, okay.
And then it's good to go for me for about another 100 rounds, and then it's start all over again. Now, I don't know what your guns...
Well, since I switched powders from Varget to Vidovori N140, now I can go a lot longer before I have to clean. So I'm at, if I clean down to bare metal, it'll take probably 15 for this one to come in, and then it'll be good for about 200 rounds. So I can shoot for 2 days before I have to clean at a tournament.
Oh, okay. And when you clean at a tournament, do you have to go to like the sight-in range or something like that to just try and foul it back up, or do you have to just you clean it at the competition, and then you go in the next day, and you're like, well, things are going to be weird here for the next 15
that would be
rounds.
horrible.
Okay.
No. There's this thing.
Okay, dude, just the nerd's mind just implodes at that point.
It was painful to hear you say that.
Yeah.
No.
It is at this point the nerd's mind.
He's running to a quarry somewhere. Just quick.
There's this thing called a blow-off period, and you get to shoot into the berm to follow your barrel in at the beginning of the day. So.
Okay. So people don't have a melt.
A coronary. Yeah.
Can
that's
you
good.
make, you talk about a multi-day event, the temperature could swing quite a bit between 2 days. Do you guys get an opportunity to kind of make adjustments before the shooting starts for that day? Or is it, nope, go with what you have? And is that where potentially where this, this, I guess, weight compensator becomes a big asset because you're able to kind of make a shift on the fly adjustment without having to touch your load?
Yeah, almost everyone loads ahead of time. They ship their ammo out, or you can only carry 11 pounds on the plane. But, they'll get their ammo out there, and it'll be 500 rounds, and it is what it is. You're not going to be loading anything else or pulling bullets. So you got to figure out a way. And I've seen crazy contraptions. I've seen, like, little incubators that guys will bring to the line, and they'll have like a heat source in there. It'll
To
be
keep
some
it as consistent as possible.
battery powered like preheater for their ammo.
You can hatch some chickens while you're there.
That's like part of my log. So you always have all your environmentals when you shoot, so you know exactly what your performance of your gun is. It'll be consistent at low die at 56 degrees with this humidity and stuff like that. I just like to keep track of all that stuff so I have a better mindset of what my dope was at that, what I needed for this powder charge, because I'm not going to change any of that.
Right.
So then if it's 56 or 96, I can figure out what I can start with before I do my cider.
Got a hair out of your action, by the way. That was gonna attribute to like 0.1 MOA of inaccuracy.
My yellow lab.
Yeah.
But one of your questions was how many people are shooting at a time, and the big ranges across the country are 100 targets wide. So you'll have 100 people that are shooting all at the same time.
That's a lot.
Yeah.
I mean, that takes a lot of people.
That takes a lot of ROs.
A lot of staff.
Yeah, it does. Yeah, and
Holy
it's usually
smokes.
volunteer based. So we've got some dedicated folks in the community that just love their fellow competitors and hanging out, and they'll sacrifice their own shooting to set up targets and shuttle people between pits and the firing line and do all the little things that we take for granted. So it's definitely like a community that supports itself in terms of running the matches and that sort of thing. So
That is awesome.
yeah.
Let's jump into these scopes here quick too, because these are interesting. And we'll kind of make this our last call since we went a little longer on you than usual, but this stuff has been super cool. I think we're just gonna have to call this Long Range 1003 F class. We finally talked to the F classers. We've mentioned F class a number of times in our other
cracked
podcasts.
the code.
We've found them in their cave, but the Golden Eagle rifle scope here is part of the reason that we're able to chat more about F class around the office, because now we have a reason for people to go out and shoot it or to understand more about it. And this is the if a scope had, I don't want to say sticker shock because that reflects price, but a specs sheet shock. When you look at this bad boy, it's a 15-60 by 52, and what's going on? I don't even know how else to segue into this thing. I just gotta ask, what's going on with this thing from folks who use it?
Yeah, it's kind of an anomaly within our lineup, but it's a tool and it's good at its job. And what's important for an F-class scope? Well, second focal plane is important because remember, we've got rings that we're shooting at on this target, and those rings are measured. So they're exactly angular. They're specific dimensions in MOA, and so we're placing very fine holds on that target. So we need a reticle that subtends like no thickness at all, almost.
You're actually, that was another interesting thing. You're holding off the target most of the time.
Yeah.
Like a PRS guy might hold off their reticle because they got Christmas trees, they've got whatever else, grid patterns, wind dots. They're holding off the reticle a lot. you guys actually utilize the target to just hold your center reticle off a portion on the target.
Yeah, I would say it's about 50-50 now. Half the people hold on the target itself, and half the people use like our ECR1 reticle in here that
It's
has
got
some,
like a couple.
Yep,
hash
and
marks, okay.
they'll use those hash marks as they hold. But the important thing is it's got to have enough magnification to see a target really well at 1,000 yards, and take that 9-ring and divvy it up into quarters, so that when, as a coach, I give a shooter, a 2 3/4 hold, he's counting in rings, right? So he's at the center. He sees the X ring first, that's 1. He sees the 10 ring, that's 2. And then he's going 3/4 of the way into the 9 ring, and that's where he breaks his shot. That's the win call.
Okay.
So you have to have enough magnification to, get that level of resolution. We're dealing with weight limits here, so it's got to be a relatively light scope for its paper specs. So that's why you see a 30 millimeter tube instead of 34 or 35 or something like that. It's got to have a decent amount of adjustment. Most people have 20-minute base or 30-minute base, so it's got to be in that 50 to 60 minutes of adjustment. It's got to be able to pick up Mirage really well. So there's a couple trade secrets that that we did with this optic to make sure it could pick up Mirage and read it really well. Especially with accessories like the ASR. I wanted this optic to be accessible, and what I mean by that is there are optics out there that are really, really high dollar, and they're good. But I wanted to show people that, you don't necessarily need illumination. You don't necessarily need a zero stop for a known distance target scope like this. Let's put our cost budget, like if we're making this from scratch right now, let's put it in really reliable tracking, really reliable turrets. Let's put it in really good glass, so we're not sacrificing anything there.
Which, by the way, these turrets sub-10 in eighth MOA?
Eighth minute clicks, yeah.
That is
so that's
teeny,
important as well,
teeny
right? Well, the X ring is five inches at 1,000, and you want to favor towards the center of that X ring. So each eighth minute adjustment is important at that point. But let's put our cost into the things that really affect your ability to win or not, and then let's get that to the market at a price that a lot of people can afford and afford to do well with. So that was the goal behind it, and it's been pretty rewarding to hear stories of success and people using it well and appreciating it and that sort of thing. So I don't know, how have you found it?
I love it. The price point and everything for it has been fantastic. And I've always had the Christmas trees and everything else.
Yeah.
But when you switch to F-Class and you talk about how you're holding and stuff, it's totally a different thing.
Yeah.
Because I haven't had just a regular crosshair since my 1022 in 1976, when I started, So now you really... You dial what you know, and then you hold off after that.
It's a combination, really. Yeah. You see a 5-minute wind out there, you might dial on 3 and then hold 2.
Huh.
Yeah.
Okay.
You want to be able to reconcile, the direction and everything in your head, but you don't want to be holding off the target. You don't want to be holding, where you can't have a good point of aim. So you dial some on and then you hold some. And
both you guys have. What the heck is it? Bubble levels.
For cant.
Had a moment. For cant. Why does that matter? I mean, your barrels are circular.
Boy, it's when I first started shooting at 1,000 and 1,200 yards, it's huge. If you cant your rifle, when you break that shot and it's canted, that it's not going to go where you think it's going to go. Your crosshairs might be right on the center, but if it's canted, with everything that happens with that gun, you pull it, that bullet's going somewhere else.
You change your optic over bore height.
You change everything.
Yeah.
Everything of that shot is totally different than how you are when you're locked into a bench, sighting it in. And so I always, when you set up, He's got the Teflon tape. My Teflon is in my rear bag itself, so everything slides. You get everything in there, and you get it solid as you can for a bipod, and you make everything is level because you can change it on your bipod here to make sure your bubble's right in the center and everything. When you recoil, it comes straight back. So this is huge, and maybe at 2 or 3 or 4 or 500 yards, no problem. But when you get out to 1,000 yards, I mean, that's a key. And I think we talked about it for your team shooting. You have to shoot with a bubble level, don't you? For your coach to.
Yeah. So one of the coaches' things that they keep in their mind is, they're sitting above you and looking through a spotter, but they're going down to make sure, you haven't all of a sudden canted your rifle mid-string or something like that. So it's a quick check for them.
Are you shooting with both eyes open so one eye can keep a kind of a tab on what the bubble level's doing, and the other eye can obviously see through the scope? Or does that have anything to do with it, or is that a tactic?
Both eyes open are pretty important for me, just so I don't get fatigued. Keeping both eyes open is a lot easier than shooting with just one. But yeah, so the off eye, the weak eye, it's looking at the bubble level, it's looking at the flags in the periphery. So they send up these wind flags. That's one of the indicators that you have to learn to read wind. And it's looking at, the vegetation, the close by vegetation for pickups and let-offs and stuff like that. So yeah, for me, it's both eyes open.
That was great stuff. I tell you, my mind is reached full.
Saturated.
I love that.
Saturated.
I really knew nothing about F-Class before going into it. I brought a few notes with me. Was actually a little worried that we wouldn't have a ton of talked about, or that at least I wouldn't have a lot to talk about. Luckily, we had these guys here, and we've talked. This might be our longest podcast ever.
I think so. One last thing I'll ask before we sign out. We'll say kind of that last part was maybe, or we'll say this is maybe our last call. I'll ask you, Niles. Do you feel like F-Class has scratched that itch for you that you had before when you said 1,200, ring and steel at 12, man, just not enough.
Boring.
Is F-Class, has that scratched the itch? How do you, now that you've started doing it, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, you get the little competition. First, it's you against, when I'm starting, it's me against me. I'm got to read the wind, I got to get my scores and everything else. And then as I go, I get pretty competitive, so I think it's going to be just fine. And if it's not, I also carbon copied his long-range rifle so that...
the ELR rifle?
The ELR rifle, so I think probably go out to Atterbury and shoot the 1 mile this summer.
Cross-training.
Yeah, so we
mix it up a little bit.
That's a 338 Ackley improved, Lapua Ackley improved with a stovepipe for a barrel on that
Truck
one.
axle, yeah.
I like the sound of that.
Yeah, so, yeah.
Last question, too. Sorry, I keep saying last question. What's your guys' groups at 1,000 yards? Because now we're not only talking about hitting steel at 1,000 yards. What kind of a group can you make at 1,000 yards?
Yeah, so, I think at the top of, FTR, the record right now is a 200 with 16 X's. And so that means that 16 of 20 shots went into that 5 inches, and there were 4 that were maybe just outside. So at the top end of the sport, it's about a 5-inch group now for 20 shots, though. Yeah.
At 1,000 yards, yeah.
All right, folks. Hey, well, there you have it. If you've been listening to Long Range 1001, 1002, and now you just feel like Niles, where, hey, man, ringing steel at these long ranges just ain't enough. Now you have a new milestone to shoot for. 5-inch groups at 1,000 yards over 20 shots.
With a 308.
With a 308, nonetheless.
And a lot of great tips and information to help get you there.
Exactly. All right. Well, folks, I think, man, I got to go, watch a cartoon or something.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah,
on.
thank you guys.
I
Thank you
really
guys.
appreciate you asking
It's
me
fun.
to show up.
Oh yeah, it's great having you guys. If you're listening to this and haven't watched it on YouTube, you should go check it out. We'll have to do maybe like a picture post, at least with maybe Ian's and maybe Niles' too, depending on how we can do it. We'll have to get a picture of these rifles. They're incredible. You can check them out a little bit on YouTube while we talk about them and point things out. But yeah, like we said, check out Instagram at Vortex Nation Podcast. We'll post a picture of at least one of these things. They're pretty sweet. So thanks everybody. We'll see you next time, and we'll end it on the old bye.
Alrighty, bye.
Bye. All right, that'll wrap it up for this episode of the Vortex Nation podcast. Thanks, everybody, for listening. Hit that subscribe button so you can always stay up to date on the latest happenings over here at the Vortex Nation podcast. You can also follow us on Instagram at Vortex Nation Podcast. Again, everybody, thanks, and happy hunting and shooting. We appreciate it. Have a good one.